Well, sorry for the technical glitches, everybody. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Kevin Hall, and I'm the Senior Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Vice President of Global Engagement and Partnerships at the University of Newcastle. And I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm hosting this virtual networking event from the lands of the Awabakal and Worimi people, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all work today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who are participating in this virtual event tonight. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. Well, this is our very first Global Alumni Webinar event. You may tell from the start that we've just had, we're just working at the technology. We've got some great speakers tonight that are joining us on a topic that we think is extremely timely and relevant. In fact, it's a topic that's been suggested by our alumni. The impacts of COVID are continuing to be felt around the world, so it's really important for us to come together as a community and support each other and share learnings like this. Before I hand you over to the host for this evening, I'd like to share a couple of quick highlights from the university this year. And you may have all recently heard that we've just cracked the top 200 in the world. The University of Newcastle is now ranked 197 in the world according to the QS ranking system. The university's moved up over 10 places since last year and has improved its ranking by over 100 places since 2014, which is a great accomplishment supported by our wonderful staff and academics, and also by our great alumni and students. Earlier this year, we officially launched the University of Newcastle's Looking Ahead strategy for 2020 to 2025 under the leadership of our Vice-Chancellor and President, Alex Zielinski. This is our plan, or our roadmap, if you like, to achieve our vision of becoming a world-leading university for our region. And it's underpinned by our values of excellence, equity, engagement, and sustainability. We've got a really, truly globally connected alumni community, and we really want to engage with more of you and work with you to help raise our profile and reputation on a global stage. We also want to offer you tangible value as you move through your career journey. We want to enhance the experience of our students through activities such as alumni mentoring and a range of other volunteering opportunities. And lastly, to many of my alumni friends who have met me over the past few years, you may have already heard, but I'm going to be saying goodbye to the University of Newcastle in late October to take up the post of the Vice-Chancellor at the University of Victoria in Canada. And it's a really bittersweet moment for me. I'm really sad to be leaving such a tremendous institution, but I've got wonderful memories from 7 years with the university. And I feel very privileged to have met with many alumni and supporters in countries across the globe, both in my former role as a Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Research and in my current role in the Global Engagement and Partnerships portfolio. I'm equally as excited to be returning to my home country of Canada to take up this new role. Well, it's now my pleasure to invite your host for the evening, our fantastic Head of Alumni Programs, Christy White, to provide you with an update on all things alumni and to introduce you to our guest speakers tonight.
Thank you, Kevin. Hi, everybody, and welcome this evening. Thanks again, Kevin, for that very warm welcome. And thank you to everyone for bearing with us as we sort of struggle through a few very brief technical difficulties at the start there. I'm really pleased to welcome you this evening. We have alumni from all over the world welcoming us, so we're quite excited this evening. We're really proud that our university now has more than 148,000 graduates doing amazing things and making their own mark on the world in their personal and professional lives in more than 144 countries. In our audience right now, for example, we have alumni joining us from the Channel Islands, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Korea, India, Mauritius, New Zealand, Nigeria, Thailand, Uganda, Zambia, Zimbabwe, the USA, the UK, and of course, here in Australia. So tonight, it's truly a global experience for all of us. We also have a chat function at the bottom of your screen on the webinar. So if I could ask everyone to quickly take a moment and use that chat function to give us your name and let us know where you're joining us from this evening. Let's just pause for a second there. So I've got Heath in Newcastle, welcome. Kylie in Newcastle. Sunny from Singapore, welcome. Dr. Joseph from Hong Kong, welcome. I've got someone from Stockton, welcome. I've got Maureen from Artarmon, which is in Sydney, welcome. We've got guests from the Hunter Valley. I've got Isabel from China. Welcome. I've got Delcy from Papua New Guinea, Gemma from the Philippines, Angela from Mulbring. I've got New Win from Myanmar. Thank you, everyone. I've got people from Sydney. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much for shouting out and saying hello via our chat function this evening. All right, so welcome to our very first Global Alumni Webinar, Seeking Safety in Uncertain Times. Tonight you'll be hearing from two leading academic experts, on mental health, Professor Frances Kay-Lambkin, Acting Pro Vice-Chancellor for Research and Innovation, who is also an alumna, member of our alumni community, and Professor Sally Chan, UON Singapore Pro Vice-Chancellor and Chief Executive Officer. This evening, we'll begin a session by providing a very brief reflection on COVID-19 and the general mental health impacts that COVID-19 is having across both Australia and Singapore. Following this, Professor Chan will explore the concept of courage and resilience in the face of COVID-19. And then Professor Kay-Lambkin will continue the conversation, focusing on the concept of psychological safety, both individually and in groups, in the workplace and in the home. If you have questions for our panelists this evening, we have next to your little chat function at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A function. So we'd like you to use that Q&A function later this evening. If a question pops into your mind, we'll be moderating that later, and we would like to give some time to all of our guests to actually pose their questions. And we will try to actually have Sally and Frances get through as many questions from you as possible this evening. Our webinar is also being recorded this evening. So if you'd like to watch it over again, or if you'd like to share our recording tonight with your own personal and professional network, please feel very welcome to do so. The link to the recording will be available for you in the next couple of days. But before we get started, I'd like to give you just a very quick and brief update on all things alumni. As I'm fairly new in the job, I started in January, and we've not travelled, we've not been interacting face-to-face with our alumni community in the usual ways. So many of you probably haven't seen or met me as yet. This year, we've launched our Alumni Insight series. This is a key sort of pivot for us in response to COVID-19, and it's provided us with an excellent opportunity to showcase the length and breadth of amazing alumni expertise out there in our alumni community. The series has been extremely well received, and if you haven't seen any of the short, brief video content as part of that series, I encourage you to pop onto the alumni website and take a look. There's some really interesting alumni sharing insights in that series there. This year was also focused on finding more meaningful ways to engage with our global alumni community. And a key part of that sees us offering more ways for you to get involved through activities such as mentoring, being our advocates, our ambassadors, as well as sharing your own achievements and your own personal and professional success. So we're really proud to have such an amazing global community of alumni achieving amazing things in the workplace and in their personal lives. And we're also working hard to get to know you better through an upcoming alumni survey, and get to know more of you through our Lost Alumni campaigns, which will be rolling out across the next probably 18 months. And so you'll be seeing some activity in your inbox coming soon. But for now, I'm delighted to introduce Professor Sally Chan and Professor Frances Kay-Lambkin. Firstly, Frances, before we dive in, could I ask you to offer a little bit of insight and offer a few comments on how COVID-19 has affected our mental health here in the Australian context? Over to you, Frances.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for having me here tonight, and for taking time wherever you are in the world to tune in and listen to Sally and to me speak this evening, and we hope it's worthwhile for you. I'm just going to attempt to share my screen. And I work in technology when I'm not in the PVCRI role, but it looks like it's all working for me at the moment. So hopefully you can see my screen, and you can now see my slides before you, which is showing you a beautiful photograph of our gorgeous city here in Newcastle, in New South Wales in Australia. And so I'm just going to take a few moments to just reflect on what's been happening in terms of the mental health and well-being, or otherwise I should say, of our wonderful people here in Australia. We know, and data is starting to emerge to indicate that the mental health of the community here in Australia is not going very well at the moment in response to COVID-19. We have various surveys that are tapping into the pulse of Australia in a number of ways. And this one before you at the moment was done just a few months ago with almost 14,000 Australians. And what we reported and what we found in that snapshot was that back in June, people were experiencing at least double the levels of clinically significant depressive and anxious symptoms than they were at a similar time last year. 1 in 4 people were reporting at least mild and in most cases very moderate symptoms. So not just having an experience or having a symptom, but actually being quite affected and almost debilitated by that experience. And certainly this seemed to be affecting those who were most vulnerable or who had experienced the most severe and far-reaching impacts of COVID-19. So people who'd lost jobs, people who were living alone or who were in poorly resourced areas, and members of marginalised minorities, and particularly women and young people are struggling a bit as well. And not only are things like depression and anxiety on the increase and psychological distress and those feelings of unrest and distress increasing here in Australia, we're seeing concomitant increases in alcohol consumption over this COVID-19 year that we are having. So in previous years, we usually see around 6% of our population here in Australia who admit to drinking daily. Now that rose to just over 1/3 of us drinking daily over the months of May to June this year. And certainly that seems to have been sparked in part by some of the restrictions and lockdown experiences we've been having with one particular group here, our Alcohol and Drug Foundation, across 1,000 parents in Australia during April when we were at the height of our lockdown. We were homeschooling and doing all of those things that we needed to keep ourselves and our communities safe. This is particularly affecting parents. So the impact of working from home, maybe of losing a job if you weren't working from home, and having to be responsible for your son or daughter's homeschooling and education really was associated with significant increases in daily drinking and drinking in front of our kids as we are at home and couldn't go elsewhere to do that. And 1/4 of parents in this survey blamed the stress of homeschooling for their increased drinking and to coronavirus-related anxiety and stress. And so really we're seeing the ongoing impacts of COVID-19 really having ongoing effects that exist beyond the virus transmission phase of the illness, at least here in Australia. And this is also being not only felt by parents, but also by kids in our families as well. With many of our young people, our 81% of people in this particular survey, of our children aged 5 to 17, reporting things that are akin to the experience of trauma that we see outside of a COVID-19 context. So things like kids having trouble sleeping alone, really acting unusually young or unusually old for their age, and really displaying these signs of trauma and distress as a function of all that's going on in our family lives at the moment. And certainly we are starting to realise, and probably all experiencing that ourselves, no matter where we are in the world, that the stress related to COVID-19 is likely to be relatively chronic. And so the negative factors that are associated with home confinement, coupled with things like fears of infection and transmission, family stresses and financial loss, can have particularly problematic and enduring effects when we find ourselves in a situation of needing to be on high alert and monitoring for potential increases in COVID-19 infection rates. This can be particularly problematic for people who already have a mental health or a substance use problem even before COVID-19, and will particularly affect things like our ability to concentrate, our irritability, feeling restless and nervous and quite worried about the world. And certainly people here in Australia have started to do a bit of modelling about if this is what's happening now, what's likely to be the impact over time. As we see what we're thinking will be the second wave of COVID, or perhaps the third wave of COVID unfold. And that will be really significant increases in common mental disorders, particularly amongst our young people, that could start emerging now and continue to emerge, but probably peak in about 2 to 3 years' time, which is a real concern given our situation here in Australia, where we're quite under-resourced and underserviced in terms of our ability to respond to an increased need for mental health and psychiatric psychiatric services. And certainly it's not just unique to Australia, and certainly worldwide we are reporting and seeing shortages of around 2 million mental health workers relative to the need that we think we'll have to respond to as COVID goes forward. And so with those reflections in mind and the concerns we have as a mental health global community going forward, I will hand that over now to Sally via Christy, just to reflect on those experiences in Singapore, and then we'll spend the rest of our time talking about how we're readying ourselves to respond to some of these challenges. Thank you.
Great, thanks Frances, thank you so much. Some worrying trends I think coming out there. But for now, I would like to hand over to Professor Chan to offer us some comments on the context currently at play in Singapore. Thank you, Professor Chan.
Thank you, Christy, for the kind introduction. Thanks, Frances, for presenting your reflection from Australia. Very good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to all the friends and alumni from different parts of the world. Let me share my screen first. Similar to what Frances said, COVID-19 has stayed with us since January this year. With this more than 9 months now, in this situation, there are so many uncertainties generate. We do not know when the COVID-19 situation will end. We do not know how COVID-19 will impact on our economy. We worry about our job. We worry about our health. So all this generate a lot of fears and anxiety in us and in the community. So what was the state of mental health for people in Singapore? This was a survey conducted in April this year, asking Singaporean the mental health. And you can see from this chart that about 20% said that they have gotten worse in the mental health. And in a more recent survey, about 3,000 Singaporean about the mental resilience, what we found in this study was the bloomers, that means those older adults, age 45 and above, appears to cope better than the millennials. For example, the older adults believe they were able to handle unpleasant emotion more than the younger generation. They are able to stay calm in difficult situations more, and they are more confident to solve the problem in life. And older adults were less worried about bad things happen to their life, and also they can control themselves from thinking about things that they cannot change. So from this perspective, it appears that if we talk about mental health promotion or risk group, we need to focus on more on younger generation. And there was a very interesting finding about people who work from home and people who work from the front line. It appears that those who work from home were more stressful than those who work at the front line. For those who work from home, you may understand that at home, there may not be a conducive environment for working. And especially for those who have children at home, it's very difficult to keep on working as normal. And as Frances said, in many different parts of the world, in Australia, the same as in Singapore, there are more people seeking help for the mental health problem. That's why the United Nations has called for action that in every country, we need to put mental health as part of the public health response to COVID-19 in order to prevent the mental health crisis that would happen in the future or is happening now. Frances has mentioned the number of psychiatrists or mental health workers in Australia. In Singapore, we only have 4.4 psychiatrists per 100,000 population. So the number was far behind OECD countries' norm, which is about 15 psychiatrists per 100,000 population. But having said that, let's look at this pyramid. Majority of us are at the base of this general population. So we are anxious, but we don't need to go to a psychiatrist. And in the middle layers, there are people who are at risk. For example, those who have suffered from COVID-19, or those who have relatives die of COVID-19, or frontline workers, or those who already have chronic illness or pre-existing mental health problems. So they are at risk. They need extra support, counseling, and also the acceptance from the society. And it is a very small proportion at the top of the pyramid that need specialist attention. So then the question for us is, how do we help those at the base of this pyramid to help them to improve the self-care, coping skills, and mental resilience, so that they will stay at the bottom and not go to the top that need specialist attention? We talk a lot about anxiety in this COVID-19 context. COVID-19 generates anxiety and fear in people. But if we look at anxiety itself, it is not all bad. So this is the graph that plots anxiety with performance. So in this graph, you can see that with moderate anxiety, in fact, you have the best performance, because anxiety would get you have a surge of adrenaline, you become more alert, you react faster. That's why we remember to wear masks when we go out. In Singapore, it's a compulsory requirement to wear a mask. So we wash our hands more often. We remember that we don't touch our face all the time. And remember that we have to maintain physical distancing. So the anxiety that we have help us to perform action that will protect us from danger. But if you are too anxious, that's the problem. Then you lost your thinking ability, you lost your focus, then you may engage in behavior that is not productive. For example, you have panic buying, you grab all the toilet roll from the supermarket, or you simply is too anxious that you cannot get out of your house. And if you are too relaxed, that's also problematic, because you don't care, and you may have excessive going out, or still go to the bar, and excessive socialization without paying attention to physical distancing. So the question is, how do we maintain ourselves with moderate anxiety, that we are alert, we are able to take care of ourselves without being too anxious or too relaxed? One of the ways that I reflect on, and I also observe many people are doing, is that, first of all, we get credible information. So when we want to understand more about COVID-19 and the related complication, we always go to credible sources. For example, in Singapore is our Ministry of Health website, maybe WHO, World Health Organization website, or in Australia, maybe the New South Wales Health Ministry website. So get credible information from credible sources. And we want to stay informed, but not overload. We don't need to check our phone every 5 minutes in order to get an update of what's happening with COVID-19. If you feel that you are very anxious about the information, so you need to put some restriction on yourself. Perhaps you will only check the information once or twice a day in order to stay informed, but not overload. Amidst all the uncertainties that we have, one of the things that we can put certainty in ourselves is the things that we can control. For example, in Singapore, work from home is still the default. So majority of us are still working from home. Then how can we put boundaries in ourselves and put structure in ourselves? What we find is that having a daily routine is very important. So we get up at the same time as we go to work. So we put things in our diary, so we follow the routine. And when we talk about follow the daily routine, it's not just the task. It is also that we pay attention to our diet, have enough nutrition in our diet, and good exercise, and also good rest and a quality sleep. That's also important, create a structure for ourselves. And at present, we still have traveling restriction. For me, I can't fly to Australia or Hong Kong to visit my family. And we also could not meet our friends and family so often as before. But physical distancing does not mean social isolation or social distancing. We still can keep in touch with our good friends, through phone or through other digital means. Tonight's topic is related to psychological safety. Psychological safety is not just about our individual safety, it's also about the safety that we feel in the community. And in this COVID-19 situation, what we observe is the anxiety, in fact, increased intolerance or prejudice towards people that may be different from us. So we may stigmatize against certain group of people, not just in Singapore, but in different parts of the world, people who may already suffer from COVID-19, people who believe that they brought COVID-19 into our country, and also healthcare workers as well. Healthcare workers also suffer from stigmatization. And how do we create a safe community for us to live in? For me, my reflection is that we can do it from ourselves. We have to pay attention to the language that we use, prevent labeling in our language. For example, in English, we will not say COVID-19 case or COVID-19 community or COVID-19 family. We will say people who have a diagnosis of COVID-19, people who receive treatment for COVID-19, or people who recover from COVID-19. So separate the disease from the person. It is also important that in the community, we share recovery story. We focus on COVID-19 can be prevented, COVID-19 can be treated, and there are a lot of successful recovery story that we can share that can promote positive emotion in the community. And the third most important is that for ourselves, we have to have empathy and kindness. Be considerate to people and always have act of kindness that we can show to people. For example, we call our colleagues, we have Zoom meeting with our colleagues frequently to see how they are going and to maintain contact with our good friends and maintain contact with our neighbors to check on them, to see how they are going and to do things to help those who are in need. So with this empathy and kindness, we can spread the positive emotion within the community. And so hopefully we will feel that we are safe in the community and also feel safe in ourselves, in our family. So maybe I stop here and hand over the time to Christy.
Excellent. Thank you so much again, Sally. Some great insights there. And I think just in general, you know, that concept of care, both showing care, self-care, but also showing care to your loved ones and to your friends and your family. It's never been more important than ever. And it's more important than ever right now. So I guess with that brief overview from both Frances and Sally on the context in both Australia and Singapore in terms of COVID-19 and the mental health issues going alongside with that, I would now like to invite Professor Chan back to the virtual stage, as it were, to present briefly on courage and resilience in particular in the face of COVID-19. Sally, thank you, and over to you again briefly.
Yeah, thank you, Christy. Remember the pyramid that I talked about. Majority of us are at the base of the pyramid. Then how can we improve our resilience and courage in order to face this adversity? First of all, resilience. We talk about resilience all the time. So what does it mean by resilience? For me, it's very simple meaning. It's our ability to stand adversity. Is resilience a born ability? No. I believe resilience can be learned, and we can all develop our resilience so that we have better ability to face adversity. How to strengthen our resilience? I would like to talk about 3 points. Shift our lenses, find our sense of purpose, and manage our personal energy. First of all, shift our lens. I believe you all have heard about the quote, we have to have the serenity to accept things that we can't change, have courage to change the things that we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I think in this COVID-19 situation, we have a lot of anxiety, worries. Some are practical worries, some are hypothetical worries. So then for us, the wisdom is to differentiate between what are the things that we can control and what are the things that we can't control. For example, we can control ourselves that we follow the guidelines on social distancing and hand washing. We can control ourselves that we stay in touch with our friends. We can control that we have healthy diet. We can control that we have a good routine that we can stick to. What we can't control is that how other people behave, you know. If people neglect social distancing, we cannot control. We definitely cannot control what the government is doing. And we cannot control whether our friends will get sick or not. And sometimes I found that if you really write it down, it helps you to reflect on your worries and anxiety, whether it's really practical worry or hypothetical worries. For those things that you cannot control, outside your control, you can do a very symbolic action to let it go. For example, you write it in, on a balloon and then put it to the air so that let go of the worries that you can't control. Or you can have an imaginary bubble, put all the uncontrolled worry and then kick it away. When you kick away all the worries that you cannot control, then you can focus your energy to manage the things that you can control and solve the practical problem that you encounter every day. Second is sense of purpose. In the past few months, I read a lot of publications that relate to studies of frontline health workers. So those studies examine what's the experience, how they feel about working as a frontline in this pandemic. And a lot of these studies relate to nurses, yeah, because they spend most of the time with the patient. And I read one study from China. In fact, a lot of this study came from China because, as you may know, that China started this COVID-19 infection from January, you know. So, and then it reached its peak earlier than many other countries. So a lot of study generated at that time now got published. And this study interviewed nurses about the experience of caring for COVID-19 patients. Of course, you know that they all gone through a process, you know. At the very beginning, everybody has fear, anxiety, just like us, yeah. And from that early stage of fear and anxious, they develop coping skills. So they found that the most important coping is the support from the peers. So they support each other. They also sort of use humor to overcome the situation. So you see that all of them have put on the what we call PPE, personal protective equipment. And you know that many of them have to wear diapers because after you put it on, you can't go to toilet, you know, so you have to wear diapers just like a baby. So they sort of use humor to overcome the situation. But one of the very important findings from this study is that nurses perceived that even under this adversity, they experience growth. And how this growth come about? So they reevaluate the role, why they choose to become a nurse, and what's the purpose of this profession. And from that, they obtain a sense of purpose, why they have to do it. And from that sense of purpose, they become more happy, calm, and confident. which is different from some other studies saying that, oh, all the healthcare workers are all anxious and depressed, you know. So that means in extreme circumstances, people can find sense of purpose and they can experience growth. In fact, this finding is quite similar to a study that I'm at present writing up with some of my colleagues from China, you know. So my study is to compare two groups of nurses, one who volunteer to work with patients with infectious disease, one group refuse. So what are the difference between the two groups? So the group refuse, of course, because of the fear and anxiety. The one who were willing to take care of COVID-19 patients, those who have a sense of purpose. They do it because they believe as a nurse, it is the professional duty. They do it for the country. They do it for the community. So sense of purpose is very important in adversity. Some of you may have read this book before, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. So Viktor Frankl was a Holocaust survivor. He was a Jewish psychiatrist and neurologist living in Austria during the World War II. And his whole family was being sent to concentration camp and different concentration camp. And after the war, he survived and he wrote this book. And this book explores why some people could survive during this extreme suffering and adversity and can live longer than those who died earlier. So what he found is that those who live longer have a why to live. That means they have a sense of purpose, the meaning of living. And because of finding the meaning of living, they can endure this suffering. So for Viktor Frankl, he described that he thought about his wife every morning. He thought about his wife and he saw the star. He thought about his wife in every moment. So for him, the meaning was in love and for love. But at that time, he did not know that his wife and his mother and brother was killed in a gas chamber in Auschwitz. Yeah, and his father also died in another concentration camp. And after he got out of the camp, he wrote a book, and he also developed a special type of psychotherapy to help people to find the meaning. So as I reflect on this COVID-19 experience, and I know myself and also some of my colleagues also sort of try to find the meaning, sense of purpose of what we are doing as a leader in an academic setting, or you as a leader in a business organization or any other setting. So what is the purpose of us in our work? What's the purpose of us in our life? And finding the meaning is sort of very important for us to face the adversity. And the third point I want to make is manage your personal energy. Yeah, we cannot build our mental health capacity without physical health. So we have to eat well, exercise, take good care of ourselves, rest well, and of course we need credible information and knowledge about the disease in order to conquer the disease. So that is resilience. We can learn how to be more resilient. The second reflection that I have is courage. As a leader in an organization, during this moment and during the past few months, you have to make decisions based on incomplete information, and you have to make quick decisions. And it needs courage. Courage does not mean that there's absence of fear. Of course, you have the fear and uncertainty and anxiety like any other people. But courage is that you realize your fear, you realize your vulnerability, and you manage it, and then you move forward. As a leader in an organization, you have to make quick decisions. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions that may not be popular, you know. And same as resilience, I believe we can practice courage and build our courage. For example, very importantly, when we talk about courage, we also have to ask what is our purpose of being here as a leader or as a team member in an organization. And we can always break our big goal into more manageable part. For example, if we say, I have to manage the pandemic, it is very big. How can I manage the pandemic? So you can break it down into smaller parts. So for me, as I'm working in Education Institute, so I will break it into small parts. How can I ensure all the students continue the study, academic progress without interruption? How can I manage the examination? How can I prepare all my staff so that they are confident about this transition from face-to-face to online learning? So when we break up this goal into smaller parts, it's easier for you to find a way and have courage to make changes. And I found that it's easier for me to build my courage if I have team members supporting me. So build your team is also important. And you empower your team, you support them so they can also take the risk to do things differently. We know that in this COVID-19 situation, we may not be able to return to normal. So that means in the future and at present, of course, when we are sort of thinking about our future strategies, what we are going to do, it will not be the things that we are doing all the time. We cannot return to status quo. So we have to have new ways of doing things, new way of thinking. So that's why we all need to have the courage to do new things and to move forward. The third point I want to say is gratitude. What do we mean by gratitude? Gratitude is being thankful. A lot of study has found that gratitude is associated with bigger happiness. When you are thankful, you have more positive emotion. And with that positive emotion, you are happier, you can build better relationship, and it helps you to be more resilient and enhance your ability to face adversity. Same as courage and resilience, gratitude can be trained. You can train yourself. You can think about gratitude in the past, your happy memory. You can think about the gratitude of the present things that you have. You can think about the gratitude towards future, your hope. You can write notes to your team to thank them. You can say thank you to people who have supported you. For me, this evening, I'm thankful to the UON alumni, Global Alumni, for inviting me, for me to reflect on the current situation and also to feel comfortable to have the conversation related to mental health. That is a part of normalizing the conversation. So this situation, this event, enabled me to present my reflection and also my vulnerability as well. To that, I'm thankful. So I'm grateful that we are able to discuss mental health in this very safe environment. So being grateful is important to build our positive emotion. With that positive emotion, we hope we can influence others, also have positive emotion. So remember, during my first presentation, I talked about anxiety. So it is for us to choose whether we want to remain in the fear zone, always complain, very irritable, very not happy, or we can move, we can learn new things, we can give up what we can't control, we identify our emotion and manage our emotion, then we move to a learning zone. And from that learning zone, we move into a growth zone. So that means we can grow under this adversity, just like the study which I present to you, growth under pressure. Even in adversity, we can find moments that we can grow our happiness, we can practice empathy and kindness, we can grow our gratitude towards life, and from that, we keep a happy emotional state, and then we spread that happy emotion to other people. And also we spread hope to other people. So if all of us can be responsible for self-care or help others to promote the self-care and coping, and maybe we can prevent the mental health pandemic that we are all worried that would happen very soon. So here I end my presentation, and I'm happy to discuss further with you about resilience, courage, and gratitude, in the Q&A time. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sally. And I think at this point, I just want to mention, resilience, courage, gratitude, and I think living each day with a sense of purpose, I think are some key ways in which all of us, as we struggle with our mental health from time to time in these challenging times, these are the things I think that will really help. So just a quick reminder at this point, if you do have any questions that you would like to pose to either Sally or to Frances, please feel welcome to do so. I'm looking at our Q&A box down the bottom of the screen, and that's where you need to go if you would like to pose your question. I see we have one in there already from Isabel, who I believe is based in Beijing. We know Isabel. Welcome, Isabel. And we will get to your question in a moment, Isabel. But for now, I'd actually like Professor Frances Kay-Lambkin to come back onto our virtual stage and to touch on those concepts around psychological safety, individually and as groups, both in the home and in the workplace. Frances, over to you.
Thank you so much. Just bear with me as I share my screen, which I hope you can all see now. So thank you, Sally, for just such an elegant and thoughtful walk through and reminder of the things that we maybe it's just me that I'd forgotten about, that we already have inside of us, and that we can actually tap into and then and come back to navigate our way through and out of the COVID-19 pandemic. So the rest of my time will be spent echoing some of Sally's comments, and hopefully you'll see in support of Sally's comments. But what I wanted to focus on a little bit is I know we know these things. We've heard, and I'm sure they all resonated. I can see in the comments coming through that these concepts of resilience, of gratitude, and of self-care are things that do resonate well with us. But sometimes, and particularly when we're under these very stressful periods and these long stressful periods, we just might not be able to tap into those. And so why might that be? And what are some of the things that we could do to create that environment where we can actually then bring to bear our resilience and our self-care strategies and be grateful and fulfill our senses of purpose? So for us here in Australia, we're really lucky, except for any of our poor colleagues joining us and alumni joining us from Victoria, we aren't in lockdown anymore. We do have some restrictions on our way of life and the ways in which we're able to interact with each other and the world, but we aren't locked in our houses anymore. And so we're starting to emerge from this sense of crisis, I guess, and that really intense period of COVID-19 that many countries are still experiencing. And we're thinking about, I guess, re-emerging into our lives and into the world again. But what most of us and many of us are finding is that although we're not in lockdown anymore, we still feel, I guess the only way to describe it is a bit off. And so what we do know, of course, and as we've seen again tonight and reflected upon tonight, that we've had such a rapid and disruptive transformation to the way we've lived our lives as a result of COVID-19. And this change in some cases can reinforce some aspects of our lives. And Sally spoke really well and thoughtfully about the ways in which nurses particularly have been able to adapt and reinforce and bring to bear some aspects of their lives that were there all along. But other parts of our lives are seriously compromised. And I think what we're all finding and all realising is that our world is unlikely to return to the way it was before COVID-19. And in some cases, that'll be great. We can adapt and we can embrace new strategies and new ways of being in the world. And I think our environment may well thank us a lot for some of those changes that hopefully will be maintained. But for others, for other things that will be associated with a sense of grief and loss and anxiety. And whilst we find our new normal or our new way of being in the world, a lot of uncertainty. And so although we in Australia are emerging out of lockdown, and as other countries emerge back into the world, things will still feel a bit off because things are still a bit off. We're back in the office here at the University of Newcastle, but we're not actually back to normal because we still, as I said, have restrictions on visitors to campus, on working and engagement and connection and function type arrangements. As we've both spoken about tonight, there are some longer term physical and emotional consequences that are emerging. We have changes to our workplace, our physical changes to our workplace, and signing in and signing out to remind us of the fact that the world's not the same. Many of us are experiencing financial stress, and really this idea of an unpredictable future weighs heavily on many of our minds. So although we are starting to emerge back into the world, it's a tenuous emergence because we're just not sure at what point we might have to retract and retreat back into our houses and back into lockdown again. And importantly, and I think as Sally alluded to before, in needing to keep ourselves informed and up to date with all of the things that are happening in our local communities and in our countries related to COVID-19, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because whilst on the one hand our desire to be well informed is really, really critical, it really does threaten our sense of safety in the world. And so we're kind of stuck with this almost Jekyll and Hyde, light and dark, daily deliberation. So we trying to integrate those two kinds of sides creates this experience in our brains which we call cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is the mental conflict that occurs when we hold two or more seemingly contradictory thoughts or values in our heads, and that causes a bit of discomfort, and quite a lot of discomfort in our minds and in our brains, and soaks up a lot of the energy in order to try to work out which side of the coin and which Jekyll or which Hyde we need to align with, and really causes us quite intense psychological distress. And so in these kinds of situations, and really COVID just brings all of this to the fore, and will continue to do that and to cause this kind of Jekyll and Hyde situation, this cognitive dissonance in our minds for quite some time. And this is why we actually can't think or act or talk our way out of feeling a bit off, out of feeling a bit out of the ordinary, and of potentially experiencing or being at higher risk for mental health and other alcohol and other drug use problems. And one way to kind of conceptualise what's happening in our brains is if we think, or in emotions, is if we think of that in terms of a bucket. And we often talk here in Australia of having a bucket, and our bucket can be full or it can be empty, and our bucket might signify a whole heap of things that we're carrying around and doing. But in this case, I'm using that analogy to refer to our emotions. So we've got an emotional bucket, and it's about 3/4 full most of the time, and it holds in that 3/4 our typical stuff that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. And there's a little bit left over in our bucket. It's not full and it's not running over. And that's our kind of surge capacity for all the emergency stuff that we're not expecting, and the out of the ordinary stuff that we might not anticipate, but we have a bit of energy or emotion in reserve to process and deal with those things that are unexpected. And in a typical year, this all works well. It's not so hard. We train ourselves to contain all this stuff. Maybe being able to adapt with resilience and coping skills and strategies in the face of a typical year. We have enough room and space and emotions in our bucket to do that. But if we either don't have appropriate coping strategies and supports in our buckets, then eventually it will spring a leak, and we just won't be able to take on any more emotion, and the bucket overall is weakened. So that's why having that base of coping strategies, of resilience, of gratitude and courage, and those sorts of, baseline and foundational qualities within us are so important, because they help us keep our emotional bucket in good condition. And often what they do is essentially, instead of waiting for our bucket to wear down, it kind of is the same as drill a hole in our bucket, in our emotional bucket, and catching it just to maintain a steady flow of being able to process emotions, dump them safely in our glass, and still keep that little surge capacity in our emotion bucket for things that are unexpected or that might pop up. So this is kind of what happens usually for us in a typical year, but of course 2020 is not a typical year. And this year, the tap that's filling our bucket is much faster than usual, and much faster than our usual coping strategies are able to cope with and divert the water that's coming in. And so our surge capacity is depleted. And I'm sure we're finding, even if we're not experiencing depression and anxiety and those disorders we've spoken about already tonight, I'm sure at the very least we're feeling that our capacity to deal with more emotions in our bucket, another lockdown, another change to the way that we're being in the world, is just something that's just really hard to comprehend. And the consequences of this ongoing stress and this state of cognitive dissonance that we are in really causes us to feel quite overwhelmed. And these are the symptoms of those feelings. So things like poor concentration and focus, not feeling motivated, sleeping poorly, just a sense of hopelessness about when this might end, some grief and loss around the way our lives used to be or what we might be missing out on during COVID-19, physical exhaustion, and of course, as Sally's talked about already, fear and anxiety, sadness, and probably some anger about the fairness or the justness of it all. And so coping with all of these emotions really still are essentially like turning on the tap in our emotional buckets that make this current situation really difficult to deal with and difficult to navigate. And so it's difficult for us to find the energy and the space and the thought we might need to then be able to go and do the things that we know will help us get out or navigate through these situations. So what can we do? Well, Sally beautifully articulated some of the things that we can do as individuals to help empty our buckets a little bit or clear the decks in order to be able to cope and navigate these second and third emotional waves or mental health waves associated with COVID-19. And certainly Sally spoke about empathy and kindness in the way that we approach others. And I really very strongly support that. But I would also say that we need a bit of empathy and kindness towards ourselves. So I think a really key approach to navigating our way through this situation is to really understand and validate and allow ourselves to feel the tiredness and the exhaustion that we feel, because it's very real. We've all come through a lot this year, irrespective of all the individual experiences that have gotten us all to sitting here tonight together. It's been a really tired, exhausting year for all of the reasons we've talked about tonight and more. Also give ourselves a break and understand that we don't have to think our way out of this. We don't have to actually come up with a solution just yet, and that we can actually hold two or even more different types of thinkings and worries and concerns in our mind at the same time, and we don't always have to choose one over another. And this is really important in helping us to tolerate the ambiguity and the uncertainty that we experience through COVID-19. And so it's okay to think that it's so terrible that so many people have died and our economy is in crisis, and at the same time feeling some relief or some joy. For example, for me, that having my work travel cancelled means that I'm home for dinner with my family every night. So I am able to feel that Jekyll and Hyde kind of emotion and response to COVID-19 and the situations that we find ourselves in without being a bad person for feeling that way. And also along those lines, just allowing ourselves to derive joy wherever we can, even in the face of these disastrous circumstances that we've thought about. And Sally's given us some ideas and some concepts to really hang on to help drive those particular actions. And again, speaking to the empathy and kindness, I think we can give ourselves a bit of a leave pass. We could be a bit kinder on ourselves. So our internal battles, our Jekyll and Hydes, our should I be feeling this way, or should I be tired when there are so many people in so many worse situations? So our internal battles will be so much more intense when we're feeling like we're letting ourselves down or behaving in ways that go against who we are. or believe ourselves to be. So just telling ourselves that we're doing the best we can in these situations is a really important thing to do. And also just not to lower our expectations, but just to soften the pressure and the demands that we put on ourselves to having to do things or having to think in a certain way or having to be on top of things when we don't feel like we have the energy to do that. And really, really importantly, we need to stay connected. Maintaining our social connections is really important in terms of us feeling safe and well. And that means within our families, but also reaching out to other people in our support networks and in our workplaces. And Sally provided some really important ways and reasons why this is critical. And I would just also add to that to say that when we do connect with other people, just to understand that we're all, our emotional buckets are full, and we may not be able to contain ourselves or contain our emotions in the way that we would normally do. So you might find people are just behaving a little bit differently or unpredictably relative to normal or relative to our usual experience of people. And that doesn't mean they've changed. It just means that our buckets are full and we can't contain the things that we're experiencing on our own. And that's why when we're connecting with people, not only do we need to be kinder to ourselves, but kinder to others as well. This concept of prioritizing psychological safety in those interactions will be really, really critical. So for those who, I know there are some of us out there who are joining tonight who are real experts in psychological safety. And I'd really invite their comments in the chat as we go on. But for those, the concept is relatively new. This concept of psychological safety is really making people feel like their fears and their concerns have been heard, that they're not going to be punished or made fun of. There won't be repercussions for raising fears and worries and concerns. And for those who need it, that they feel like we can do something to help put things in place to support people who need it. And this is something that we can do in our interactions with other people, in social interactions, but particularly in our workplaces and in our teams and in our offices. This is something that we can all work towards. So we might not be able to be physically as safe as we would want to be. We might not be able to give people the certainty that they're all craving and wanting. But really this concept of psychological safety is something that we can all work towards and contribute to. So it's everything from encouraging people to speak up when they are feeling uncomfortable or fearful, through to understanding the concerns that people might have at home and might be bringing to work and so forth. And here are just some very quick tips to think about when we're trying to actually put this into practice and maximise psychological safety as leaders, as team members, as workmates and as a community. So things like monitoring wellbeing, using multiple ways to connect with people, increasing our proactive check-ins with people, and improving and talking out loud the ways in which we're making decisions and thinking about things that are important to us. It's really important to communicate our values and our thoughts and our feelings, again, in line of that transparency, and to check how people are feeling in terms of being aligned or connected to those ideas. And there are also lots of different ways in which we can continue to connect, even if it's not in the usual way. And Sally's also talked about some ways in which we can put that into practice. And also make sure that we're being democratic with our time and attention and taking an approach to include people rather than exclude people. And that might be the person on the street, it might be the person who serves us in the shops, it might be people on the front line, it might be people in our teams and offices at work. And so they're just some very, very quick ways in which we can work towards maximising psychological safety in the different environments that we are in. And if we do so, that can provide a really strong foundation for us to be able to mobilise the things that we need in order to get through COVID. And maybe that can help us empty our little, create some space in those little emotional buckets of ours so that we can deal with the other things, the big things that we need to manage on. But I think we do need to work together. The world needs new thinking, new ideas and new approaches to face these challenges together. And I think that's why I'm really particularly proud to work at the University of Newcastle, where we are getting ready to do this right now. So thank you very much, and I'll hand back to you, Christy.
Great. Thank you so much, Frances. And some excellent points there just around, I think, what we can do to ensure that the people we're living with, you know, we're friends with, we're working with, what we can do to ensure that they just feel safe to express their emotions and how they're feeling in what is a fairly tumultuous and quite challenging and a time of great upheaval for all of us on many fronts. So with that, let's get stuck into some Q&A. So I'd like to ask sort of Sally and Frances to join me in the Q&A. Poised. First of all, I'd like to ask you a question. Either of you may choose to answer this. This question is from Scott. Scott is based on the east coast of Australia, where we've had successive disaster situations, bushfires, then COVID. And given that apparent ongoing nature of climate change related stresses, just in and of itself, and the elevated levels of fear and anxiety and concern that are now sort of constant and ongoing, rather than sort of knowing that there may be an endpoint, but moving into this period where we're thinking, are we just in this very prolonged, unending, heightened, anxious, heightened sort of stress and fearful environment? What are the implications for mental health given that? And what can we do to help our loved ones dealing with that?
Shall I go first? It's a really important point, Scott. Thank you for raising this. And I guess it speaks to that idea of, I don't want to say new normal, but I think to think that this particular situation will have a start and a finish is unrealistic. And especially in the context of, you know, the bushfires and the floods that we've particularly had in Australia and in New South Wales, particularly this year already. So I do think it involves a real, so I'm worried about our mental health and wellbeing. I'm worried about significant increases in levels of new cases of depression and anxiety, particularly in alcohol and other drug use disorders. And I'm particularly worried about suicides. I'm also worried because I don't think we have mobilised the mental health response that we need. But what I'm encouraged by is that we have lots of things that we can do, and certainly the research community in mental health in Australia particularly, and I'm sure it's the case for you as well, Sally, and the world over, we do have answers and we do have things that we can deploy and integrate with our services to respond to this increasing demand. So I have huge concerns. I'm really concerned about our young people, and Sally showed some really interesting data about how cohorts my age and older are just adapting and being a bit more, I guess, resilient in the face of these disasters than our younger people are. And I guess that makes sense because they haven't had as much time to have these experiences. One of the other interesting reflections that I heard in talking to a counterpart who works out at Orange in the central western part of New South Wales here in Australia was that the rural communities are very, very resilient communities because they've been dealing with these big things like big droughts and ongoing issues like this for a long time. And really what it's done is brought to light in our cities and metropolitan areas the experiences that our rural communities have all the time. So I think probably what we'll see is turning to our groups who have experience and unfortunately lived experience of this for some shared ideas about how to navigate our ways out. Yeah. And through.
And Sally, thank you, Frances. And Sally, do you want to add anything from your perspective?
Yeah, I agree with Frances. Yeah, and we could not see the end of the adversity, you know. Yeah, and probably I also believe it's life, you know. Yeah, every stage of our life we have different challenges, and the point that we are discussing today is that how can we enhance our resilience so that we can build more capacity to face those challenges. And when we talk about resilience, it's not just individual resilience, but also resilience within a community. Yeah, and so Frances, you mentioned about the shortage of qualified psychiatrists or mental health worker. And we know that we cannot build up the workforce, tomorrow, you know, and it will take time. And then in the meantime, how can we support each other? How we, in the community, how we can take care of each other so we can help each other to build the resilience. Yeah, I think that is very important. Yeah, and as I said, there are things that we can control. There are things that we can't control. We can't control the nature. We can't control what the government is doing, although we try to influence. Yeah. But what we can control is our perception of the situation and how we can build our community so that we can spread the kindness and empathy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sort of touches in, we're receiving quite a few questions. One of the other ones we have is sort of on that, touches on that point around how can we actually, you know, assist members of our community when we're having a mental health crisis and when we have a mass shortage of mental health care professionals and mental health care services, which are already stretched to maximum capacity.
Yeah, maybe let me share the experience in Singapore. Yeah, so when we compare with the number of psychiatrists in Singapore with Australia, of course, Australia is a much better position than in Singapore. And of course, yeah, there are a lot of rooms that we can improve our national health system. And but I also believe that we can think about other resources that we can help people, you know. And apart from, you remember the pyramid that I've shared. So not all people need specialist sort of attention. And we can always mobilize many people on the ground. For example, general practitioner GPs, they can play a part in taking care of people with mental health problems. And in fact, even for school teachers, for nurses, for advanced practice nurse, for allied health workers, for counselor, they all can play a part in taking care of different groups of people that need the help. And especially we talk about the younger people, adolescents, they are in the school. I believe school teacher can play a more important role in both the assessment, in promoting mental health literacy, and also make necessary referral for those students who may need the help. Yeah, and the same as in social workers. Yeah, we can always upskills this group of frontline workers, and so that they can also contribute to taking care of people who may need the help. Recently, I read a very good sort of toolkits developed from WHO. It's called Basic Psychosocial Skills, a guide for COVID-19 responders. So that is a very brief book that provide some basic skills for the frontline responder of COVID-19, how they communicate with people, how they can show kindness in different ways. And so it's a credible source. It's from in partnership with WHO in developing these toolkits. So, and those who have interest may want to have a look. Yeah, and I also recently have read another toolkits for children. Yeah, because we also believe that children or younger people may be sort of at risk at this situation. And the book is called My Hero Is You. It's endorsed by WHO and also UNICEF. And I find it's very useful book that we can use, parents can use to explain the situation to the children. Yeah, I think that there are sort of different parts that we can do, and allied health can do, and even frontline sort of worker can do to help to improve mental health.
I'll just very quickly add to that and put a plug in for virtual and technology delivered interventions. So Sally and I both work in this space and create apps and online courses and programs that can teach people to be their own therapist. And we've had lots of success in demonstrating the positive impacts of these programs in reducing depression, anxiety, and alcohol and other drug use. and particularly can be used to augment the care that might be provided, or a check-in that might be provided with a health worker in any context. So these are tools that people can use themselves, or that GPs and frontline workers and other health professionals and allied health professionals can have in their back pocket, their virtual back pocket, and use to augment the care that they're able to provide and kind of extend the reach and of their care. And I think that's one of the silver linings, if I can say that, of COVID-19, is that our willingness as a society to connect virtually and get our services and so forth virtually is a really important step in being able to then accept that we can also get our healthcare virtually at the same time. So as I said, we have the tools there, and now we have the attitude and the acceptance and the willingness to engage virtually. And I think that's what we're doing to prepare and help strengthen our response to these issues.
Yeah, I fully agree with Frances. I think the use of technology to deliver healthcare can give options to people. Yeah, it doesn't mean that everybody like the technology, but there are people who prefer to use technology than in-person service. I think that are very good, and especially in these circumstances that we need social distancing and we cannot meet each other. So the use of technology, especially the apps that Frances mentioned, she and her team have developed, are very sort of useful, and it's also very timely as well.
Absolutely. And I think that partly
challenges.
actually answers one of the other questions that have come through on the Q&A around, are there any books out there? Is there some publications? Is there some tools out there that I can access to help me with this? So what I'll do in answer to that, I've actually noted some of these toolkits that Sally mentioned that have been developed in conjunction with the World Health Organization. There is the My Hero Is You publication, and then Frances has also mentioned some of those sort of self-service online tools and the online apps. So what we might do is actually, I'll come back to you ladies, and if with your permission, I'll actually, when we send out our thank you for attending the event message to our audience, if I could perhaps include some names and some links to those publications and those online tools, that would be fabulous, and that would answer our question very well for our audience.
One of the benefits
we can send the link
my bookcase at home. I've got ready to go.
Yeah, ready to go. So I think for those of you who are interested in doing a little bit of further light reading on how you can help and what role you can play, we can answer those questions for you, so bear with us. Next, I would like to actually go to a question that's been posed by Sankat, who I know is our alumni, the current president of our alumni network based in Singapore. So Sankat, thank you for your question. And his question is, what can I do when I'm in that situation where I'm actually speaking with a friend or a loved one or a colleague who is actually articulating that they're struggling with depression and anxiety? What can I do in that moment when I'm speaking to someone? How can I help?
It's a really good question. And so the first thing is just to realise that giving somebody a safe space to leave their story is one of the most important things that you can do. You don't have to do much more than just listen and be there for the person as they are able to empty their bucket a little bit and leave it safely with you. Now, of course, we will all feel like we want to help and we want to do something a bit more proactive like that. But certainly we don't have to do that, and people aren't expecting us to fix their problems, and it's probably not even for health professionals realistic to think that we can fix another person's problems. So step one is to listen. And just to say, I'm here for you. I might not be able to help you, but I'm a good listener, and I will listen and I will spend that time with you. Now, if you think the person is unsafe, if they are talking about feeling the way they're feeling for most days of the week for a good couple of weeks or more, then that's the sign that they probably need to get some help and some professional help. And so we can certainly send through some links that are available to help people access information about help, online screening tools for depression and anxiety and alcohol and other drug use problems. And you may even like to sit with that person and say, oh, look, I'm not really sure. I'm worried because it sounds like it's not the usual you, and it's been going on for a longer than a usual time. We could go and do a questionnaire together and see. or you could go to your general practitioner or a primary care practitioner, depending on the situation in your country, who will often be a great source of advice about where to go next to access treatment. And you can also then use any of the links we provide to our online apps and programs that might be helpful to help just to tide people over in between where they are with you and when they're able to seek professional help. But just really being able to listen carefully and letting that person tell their story is one of the most important things you can do, and is in fact one of the first things we do when we're in therapy with people ourselves as professionals.
Yeah, fully agree with Frances. Yeah.
And on that
safety
note,
is very important. Yeah, the first thing is to reassure that the person is safe, with us, and we will, maintain the safety. And yourself, of course, have to be calm. Yeah, and I fully agree with Frances that, if you want to do more, you can always go further step, maybe refer different resources to the person. And it's also good for the person to, they can choose what they want to do so as to promote the self-efficacy. So they are not sort of helpless, they can take active steps to help themselves. And also you may want to understand the social support, and encourage them to reach out their social support.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that response, Sally and Frances. Really useful information. And on that note, we are slightly over time. And before our online platform decides to kick us all off, I want to spend just a few minutes at the end of the webinar thanking you so much for joining us. Our wonderful speakers. I wish we had more time to soak up your expertise and your knowledge and your advice on this topic of mental health and how we all get through this quite challenging time. So thank you again so much to Professor Sally Chan and Professor Frances Kay-Lambkin for spending your time with us this evening. I'd also like to say a quick thank you to Professor Kevin Hall, who did the introduction this evening. And most importantly, thank you to you, our audience. Thank you to our alumni and supporter community. We greatly appreciate your time this evening. We hope you found it enjoyable, valuable, educational. We will be sharing some further information with you, a link to the recording this evening, as well as some of those key resources that Frances and Sally mentioned. But for now, thank you again for your time, for so generously sharing your time with us. Good night. Take care and stay safe. Thank you.
Bye. Stay safe. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Take care of yourselves and each other.